Hey everybody, today it is time to make cheese. I'm actually making two cheeses today. The first one is Gouda, and this is, I've already started. So I've got 2 gallons of milk on the stove, already brought up to temp on the thermometer, 86 degrees. And this one calls for a water bath, and I don't like water baths. So you're supposed to do a water bath. I don't. So I've got this up to 86 degrees. We're going to quickly go over what you're going to need to make Gouda, and then I'm going to get going on this. Warm this up to 86. You are going to need something to cut your curds with later. You are going to need a mold for the cheese with a press. And you're going to need some butter muslin, at least 1 piece of this. And you can buy all of these supplies at any cheese making website, or Amazon's got some of them. A little cheese mat. And the main thing, which is going to be the miso 2 culture, which I'm going to add right now. You take a 1/4 teaspoon of the culture. This is at 86 degrees. I've just turned off the heat, and I'm just going to sprinkle that over the top of the milk. We're not going to stir it in, and we're going to set a timer for 5 minutes just to rehydrate that starter. And then after that, you will need a 1/4 cup of water with a 1/2 teaspoon of rennet diluted in it. So that's going to sit for 5 minutes, and then after 5 minutes is up, you're going to come back with a whisk and just up and down motion and just kind of incorporate that culture into the milk without disturbing it a whole lot. I just do an up and down for about maybe 30 seconds, sometimes a minute. It depends on the cheese, and each recipe will have different instructions for you on this. And a couple of other things you're going to need if you're going to do Gouda. Obviously, it's one of those cheeses that ages, so you're going to need a cooler of some kind. We have a little wine cooler that I found on Craigslist, and it works great, and you can keep the temp and the humidity right by putting the cheeses in different little separate Tupperware type containers with a little piece of sponge, and you can get your humidity and the temp right if you find a little wine cooler. You're also going to need a big colander that can straddle this pot or the sink, and you're going to need a cheese press, which I have, and I will get to that a little bit later when I set this up to press it. The thing also with Gouda, I'm going to put a lid on this, and we're going to let it sit for 45 minutes, and try to hold that 86 degrees for the whole 45 minutes, just off with the heat off. One thing I will point out while this is sitting, if you are making any cheese really, but especially the ones that press and that go in a cooler, and you have various steps that will take you multiple days, make sure you read through the whole recipe before you start. I did it wrong the first few times and was like, yay, making cheese, and just start whenever, and you find yourself taking things out of the press at 3:30 in the morning. So this Gouda, I start this either early, like it is 10:30ish right now. Start it early before noon, because it is going to, once you get done doing all the stovetop things, it's going to sit in the press for 8 hours. So either time it where the 8 hours is up right before you go to bed, or time it where you're working on this later in the day and it's going to go in the press and it can sit overnight and you deal with it the next morning. That's any cheese. And this one is going to get waxed later. I'm not going to wax this in this video. I will post a link to my cheese waxing process right here when that video is ready. Sorry, there's a kitten at my feet who smells the milk. After 45 minutes has gone by, we've held a nice 86 degrees perfectly here with the starter culture on the milk. The next thing that you would do, if you are using pasteurized milk, right now you will be adding calcium chloride and the rennet. I am using raw whole milk, so I'm not using calcium chloride, but that is something you would use if you were using pasteurized milk. So just check your recipes. So I'm going to add my rennet in some water to this, and we're just going to add that in, and then we're going to whisk it for 1 minute. Same thing, just in an up and down, just to make sure that it's really incorporated into the milk. And again, we're not whipping it really hard or whisking it around a lot. So if you were using calcium chloride, you would do that for a minute like this, and then you would add the rennet and whisk this in for a minute as well. And there's our timer. So we're still maintaining a really nice 86 degrees without a water bath. So the thing I've found with water baths, we're going to cover that. The thing I found with water baths is the temp. I find this easier to watch the temp. With a water bath, as you turn off your temp and you get close to 86, the water continues to keep this milk warm, and it continues to rise, and the temp gets too warm, and I've had it get way too hot in a water bath for some reason. So I just watch it on the actual burner and it seems to be easier for me to control it that way. So I'm going to let this sit undisturbed for another 45 minutes, and then it will be ready to cut. After 30 to 45 minutes, and you can check this at those two different times, this has been about 35 minutes. We're going to check and see if the curds are ready to cut, and I just take a little cake decorator spatula and you make a little cut in that way and come up under it and lift and see how nice and clean that break is. That means these are ready to cut, and we are going to cut just straight down, and we're going to cut this in 1/2 inch, and I don't measure it, but you know, try and get close because each different cheese will have different sizes of curds, just because of the amount of whey that you're releasing probably throughout the process. These are looking a little bigger than 1/2 inch, but you know, again, I'm not a super stickler about it, and it probably matters. I guess some cheese expert could chime in and tell me that. So I'm going to go across this way, and then we're going to go back the other way, but you want cubes. So we are going to cut all of them up and down like this, but we're also going to come back through and cut under like this so that you're getting cubes. And I know there is a special, like a curd knife you can probably get from like a cheesemaker supply company. I've looked at them, and because I sometimes use different size pots and I often make different size cheese curds, I just end up using this method, and it's worked fine for me so far. And once those are all cut into 1/2 inch, we're going to let them sit for 5 minutes, and then we're going to come back and stir them for 5 minutes, and then we're going to let them sit for another 5 minutes. And while we've been doing this, we need to be heating up a pot on the stove. I've got over here 2 quarts of water heating up to 140 degrees. And we're going to be using that. We're going to be taking some of the whey out of this. Once these curds have settled, we're going to take 2 cups of whey out, and we're going to add 140 degree water in, and we're going to slowly bring the temperature of these up. And you'll find with a lot of cheeses, especially with this one I'm noticing, there's a lot of steps. So read the recipe and kind of plan ahead, because you will find yourself stirring, letting it rest, coming back, stirring it for 10 minutes, letting it rest for 10, stirring it for 20. Like, there's a lot of back and forth. You don't need to be here for the whole process. I mean, a lot of these 45-minute sit times you can leave. I just went and did a bunch of chores outside. But during this latter stage, you are going to need to be pretty much hands-on involved, because you're watching the clock. Just stand here and stir it, or let it sit. But you will be doing some broken up time periods where you are spending time at the stove, so plan accordingly. For example, these just sat for 5 minutes, and now I'm going to stand here and stir these. Just move them around. We're letting them release whey as they sit, and as you stir them, and then as they sit, they're just releasing more and more the whey. And you will see when you're done with all of this, the curds will have shrunk down to quite a bit smaller than they started. And this is where I will, because of the way that I cut them and they're not exactly all 1/2 inch, I will just take the edge of my spatula that I'm stirring with and just slice and just kind of cut the ones that look like they got too big, or that they didn't get, the ones that look like they're too big and didn't get cut enough. I'll kind of cut those so that you have a lot more uniform sizes. So we've just stirred those for 5 minutes, and we're going to let them sit. And in 5 minutes, they will have sunk to the bottom a little bit, like this. Okay, so the curds have settled down to the bottom of the pot. I'm going to pull the thermometer out, but we have kept the 86 degree temp during this process. And we're going to just take a measuring cup and pull off. To start with, we're going to pull off 2 cups of the whey. And if you trap some cheese curds in there, you can strain them back in afterwards. 2 cups pull off. Let's just get rid of that. And then we want to start bringing this up from 86 to 92 degrees with the 140 degree water. So I'm left-handed, so this is strange for me. So what we're going to do is start with 2 cups of the 140 degree water. We'll put the thermometer back in, and we're going to just add 1, 2, and then we're going to stir that a little bit, and that brought it up to 88-ish. So you're going to keep adding a little bit of the hot water in small increments until you get up to 92 degrees. And that took us about 2 more cups. So we added 4 cups of 140 degree water to this. And now I'm going to stand here and stir it for 10 minutes. And we're going to add more hot water again until we get up to 98 degrees. So we've let these settle for about 8 more minutes. And I'm just going to take out another 2 cups of the whey. And right now we are at 95 degrees. So during that last sit time, it actually went up from 92 to 95. I only need 98 on this next edition of hot water. So I am going to be very careful about adding the hot water for this stage, just because I don't want to get it. I've had this happen where I go like, oh no, it went up to 107. Like, you can get it too hot really fast. So just be careful when you're adding your hot water and watching your thermometer. So we've just hit 98 degrees. It's been easy in the past for me to go over the temp and basically scald these, and they still turn out, but I'm always very excited to get the temperature just right. So I'm going to stand here and stir these now for 20 minutes, and then they will have shrunk down as much as they're going to shrink down, and we're going to let them settle to the bottom of the pan, and they will be back to show you the next stage. After stirring these for 20 minutes, you can see how much smaller the curds have gotten. The book says they should be the size of small beans, so I guess that's good enough. But I've kept the temp really steady on this batch, so I'm happy with this. And now we're going to let these sit for 10 minutes to sink to the bottom. And it says they're supposed to knit together, so they're supposed to start sort of clumping together. And then we're going to come back and get these out of the way and into the mold. All right, so this has sat and settled for 10 minutes, and wash your hands really well or wear gloves. I have a colander here that I have warmed up with some warm water and a damp piece of butter muslin. You're going to need 2 pieces of this cheesemaker's muslin. So we're going to line the colander with the damp cheesecloth muslin. So I'll actually just use a small kitchen sieve and just use that as your little scoop and get them out of the water and into the colander. And once you have them all in the colander, we're going to let them sit there and drain for 5 minutes, and then we're going to put them in the mold also lined with damp butter muslin. So these have drained, and we're just going to transfer them from the colander to the mold, and they've kind of stuck together into sort of a chunk. So what you're going to do is sort of break off pieces of the settled curds and put them in the mold, and just put them in and make sure you pack them in as you go. Kind of press them in with your hands so you're pressing in the little chunks so they're sitting tight to each other. And I'm just going to go ahead and do that with this whole mold full of cheese. And once it's full, we're going to put it in the press. And stop every once in a while and just press everything down and fill in any little gaps, because you don't want gaps in the finished cheese, because that is where you're going to end up with mold, speaking from experience. All right, so I'm just giving these one more quick press, and just press them down firmly with your hand so they're as kind of packed in there as you can get before you put them in the press. And then you're going to pull the remainder of the cheesecloth butter muslin over the top of the cheese, because that's what's going to be between the cheese and the follower. Here, this is a follower, so you're going to just put that down inside on top of the cheese and press it down. And you can see the main thing, the first 20 minutes or so, you definitely want to watch this as it presses down, because you don't want it to have a low spot and press down. And I've had it happen where it pressed down so far it got really lopsided. So get it in there as level as you can, and see how there's not much room there. So I actually will use a second follower to give that extra height as that presses down. Otherwise this will disappear below flush with the mold. And that is going to go on the press. And you don't have to get fancy. This is a really cheap press. I'm not super impressed. I'm not impressed with the press. It's cheap. It does the job, but these boards are already starting to warp. So I have it linked down below in my Amazon stuff, but I mean, if you want a cheap one, this is definitely a cheap one. And then it's got little wing nuts that you put on, and you're going to just hold this. So mostly I use the wing nuts are to keep this from settling too unevenly as you're pressing. We're going to press this at 10 pounds for 30 minutes. And you do not need to go buy a bunch of fancy weights. My 10-pound weight is going to be 2 5-pound bags of Bob's Red Mill organic unbleached all-purpose flour. And just add on from there. I think we're going to do this for 30 minutes. And I always watch, just make sure that as right when you're setting up, make sure that that's sitting as level as possible in all directions, because this first 15 minutes is going to be where you get out of whack if you're not careful. So there, we're going to leave this with 10 pounds on it for 30 minutes. I'm going to come back and take it out of the mold, flip it over and rewrap it and put it back in the mold, and we'll Jenga stack another bag of flour. So we have 15 pounds of weight, and that is going to sit for 8 hours. So It is 1:30 now, so I'll be taking this out of the mold tonight before bed, and then it'll go into the next step. So it's been 30 minutes, and we are going to pull that out of the mold. I usually just put a little rack down in the sink just to keep this from sitting right in the sink, just to keep it clean, I guess. Pull the follower out, pull the cheese out that's still wrapped, and we're going to just unwrap it and flip it over. Wash your hands because you're going to be touching the cheese. Turn it over and rewrap, and then we're going to put it back in the mold with 15 pounds of pressure, and it's going to press for 8 hours, and then we're going to pull it out and do so many more steps. This is one of those multiple steps. Like, definitely enjoy the process because it's going to have a lot of steps. Colby does. There's a few of these that have a lot of steps, and this turns out to be one of them. But it's worth it in the end. So I'm just covering that with the fabric again, and we're going to put the follower back in and see how that has gone down level with. So if you just buy one mold and it only comes with the mold and the follower, I have a smaller mold which has a small follower which I can use. So you may have to make yourself something to be this little spacer because you can't, that's not going to press like that. So we're going to put that back in the mold with the extra little follower, and make sure that you're really centered under the center of, on the center of the whole mold is everything's centered over the top of that. I'm going to go ahead and put the wing nuts down to fairly, not tight, but just so they hold, so it's holding. And then we have our handy dandy 10-pound weights, but we want 15 pounds to go for the next 8 hours. So I'll find whatever I need. I found a 4-pound box of salt and a 16-ounce bottle of ranch. So that's going to be, that is going to be, I literally, this is how I do it. Like, I'll just, you can buy weights if you want, but I mean, if you have the stuff in the kitchen, why not? So this, I'm going to move this when I turn off the camera. I'll move it so it's out of the way right here. So I'll be back at the end of 8 hours, and we're going to pull this out of this press situation, unwrap it, and put it in a saturated brine and hold it at 50 to 55 degrees for 8 hours longer. So that will take us until tomorrow morning, and I'm going to take it out of the brine and then air dry it, and we'll start doing the aging process. It's the Gouda that just came out of the press after 8 hours, and we're going to unwrap it. And you can see how nice and solid that looks. And I have 2 quarts of brine here. I think this is a medium heavy brine. I think I said saturated earlier. It's medium heavy. And we are going to put that in the brine and just make sure it's a little bit submerged. And I put a cover over it, and that's going to sit in that brine at 50 to 55 degrees overnight. And in the morning, we will take it out. So the next morning after this is sat in the brine for overnight, you're going to pull it out, and I like to just have a couple paper towels handy, and we're going to try to touch it as little as possible. You will develop mold more easily if you do handle it too much. So we're going to just pat it dry and have a cheese mat handy. And we're going to set it right on that, and then that goes on a little tray, and then this will go on top of a cookie sheet so that the remainder of any whey that's coming out of it is going to drain down onto the tray. And do not turn the oven on, but I set this in the oven to air dry for 1 to 2 days, and I'll turn it halfway through the process just to make sure it's really air dried before we wax it. You can leave it on the counter, which I know seems weird if you have cheese sitting out, but that's how you make cheese. I have cats here, so I put mine in the oven, and to make sure I don't ruin it, I take a wooden spoon and just set it there. And sometimes I'll actually even put a note on the stove that's like, do not, no touch. So we will leave that there for a day or 2, and then we're going to come back and wax it and put it in the coolers. So this is the finished Gouda. We made this in July, and it was set to be open between August 15th and January 15th. And today is, I believe, October 10th. All right, we're going to take a look and see what we got here. And I'm having to put a lot of pressure on this. So again, if you're doing your own cheeses, be careful. All right, moment of truth. Let's see what we got. Oh, look at that. That looks terrific. Goodness gracious. Very, very nice. All right, we've taken the wax off, and as you can see, I don't add color to my cheddars or my Goudas. So this is what real cheese looks like. It's just basically the color of milk. And people that are making cheese that's this color are adding, there's just an additive that you would add, but it's not necessary and I don't use it. So I'm going to try a little bite of this, but you can see it turned out perfect. And this has aged for about 3 months. It was in the cooler for probably a month with the humidity, and then I just put it in the refrigerator. So it's been in the refrigerator waiting for me to cut it open. So I just trimmed off a little bit and had a taste, and it's wonderful. It's got just the right amount of moisture, and the texture is really nice, and it's got a really nice Gouda flavor. So I hope this inspires you to try making your own cheese. This one has a lot of steps, as we saw in the video, but it is worth doing. It's a little harder than cheddar. If you're looking for something a little easier to make, I would recommend starting your cheese making journey with this video right here. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.